Welcome to today's masterclass. We'll be joined, obviously, by Karen Hutchings, and this is really going to be a quite focused session. The goal for today is to really go through a deep dive on how to leverage technology to modernize your business travel program. What you'll see in the bottom right is a QR code. That is access to a white paper as we want to create value beyond just today's time together. Focused in particular on how to build sustainable travel programs, which has been a big focus of ours at Clarasight and something that Karen has wonderfully demonstrated in her time at EY and the work that she continues to do as a consultant and advisor. That said, today's session, again, is going to be 30 minutes. That does include Q&A. And for those that are looking to take notes, please know that we will also circulate a recording within about 72 hours of the completion of the webinar. As you can see in the bottom bar of the Zoom screen, there's a Q&A section. And so, again, we'd encourage folks to submit questions that either Karen or I can help address, but we want to make this as interactive and as engaging as possible, and most importantly, as high value for each of you that are with us in attendance today. So, Karen, I'll let you kick things off by sharing a brief introduction of your background, and then I'll dive in from there.
Well, first of all, I just want to say that all the difficult questions that may come through, Adam, I will pass over to you to answer, just to be very clear from the QR code. But hi, everybody. My name is Karen Hutchings, and I'm the founder of Cobb Hutch Consulting. Started that just over a year ago, and I'm basically supporting a number of different startups in the travel, meetings, and events space as a strategic advisor and on the board of one of them. So thank you for having me today.
Absolutely. And I'm Adam Braun. I'm the co-founder and CEO at Clarasight. For those of you that are with us, I'm sure to some extent there's a little bit of curiosity as to if you're new to Clarasight, why we wanted to host a session like this one, given the fact that we've been able to host a lot of webinars over the last several years. And I wanted to kind of give a little bit of context into what we plan to cover today, and again, why we wanted to host this discussion. So, first and foremost, Karen's going to talk through a bit on innovation, specifically in travel, meetings, and events. From there, we'll go into new technologies, and then she's going to share a few select examples of how these really come to life, and then we'll, again, create space for a Q&A opportunity. But back to what I wanted to just kind of set a little bit of context around for those that are newer to our sessions. Clarasight is a startup that was founded a little bit more than 3.5 years ago. Today, we work with companies with a collective market cap of over $3.5 trillion, more than $2 billion of managed spend. And our goal is to really help you all in the travel or sustainability space within the context of the modern enterprise to build travel programs that are aligned to your company's primary objectives. And that oftentimes means balancing business goals with costs, sustainability, and team member priorities. And we've been really fortunate to build a truly extraordinary advisory board of select leaders across both travel and sustainability. And Karen has been an absolute standout in that regard as an advisor to us as a company. And I felt like it was almost selfish to kind of be the only ones that were able to gather and really imbue so much of her knowledge into the work that we're doing with many of the enterprises that we support through software and services. And I asked Karen to host a masterclass with me on the deep subject matter expertise that I think she can bring to the table for all of you. So with that said, Karen, I'll turn it over to you. And again, it's really excited for you to share your wisdom and expertise.
Perfect. Well, thank you. And I do get quite nervous, I have to say, about the masterclass billing. But what I would say is that I became very, very curious about the different types of technology out there, probably around 6 or 7 years ago, because I was very fortunate to work for an organization that actually gave us access to brilliant people. And I think the reality of that is you can either ignore that it's going on out there, or you can embrace it. And I was very fortunate in the fact that I was able to fulfill my curiosity, and I embraced it. And what I'll try to explain to you, though, is in layman terms as to what this all means, because I think sometimes it's very easy to get overwhelmed by all the different names of these different technologies out there and actually not appreciate that we're all using it on a day-to-day basis, but we just don't realize that we are. But I think the real reality as well is that the demands that's happening in the travel, meetings and events industry is such that we have to change the mindset as to what we do to deliver to the expectations of the travelers that are out there. And so, as you all know, there is this desire now for there to be the retail experience for corporate travel. And this is absolutely not going to be a discussion around NDC, but certainly NDC in the airline space is driving that. What you also have is the fact that there is multiple startups in the travel, meetings and events space. And I would argue that they're all coming in and becoming these new entrants there because the travel industry in general is built on fairly old, archaic technology. And so what a lot of these entrepreneurs see is an opportunity that they can actually challenge what the status quo is. What you will also find, and I'm sure many of the travel managers on the call are realizing, is now the technology departments within organizations have more to say around the travel program and the meetings and events program because of the tech stack that's required, but also because of IT security reviews and various other compliance elements to use techs coming in, which means they have much more of a greater part to play when it comes to selecting different techs. What I would also say as well is that invariably within any organization, alternative tech is being used. So if you think about the testing that went on during COVID with pharmaceutical companies and how they actually got to speed so quickly the vaccination, we know for a fact that that would not have been driven just by people doing that. They would have been using tech extensively. Professional services close to my heart, certainly from my past life, is how they actually use tech to deliver audits now and actually not rely on people in the same way. The same in financial services. And in fact, in any industry that you look at, there will be robotic processes, AI, augmented reality being used within your organization. And so then it does ask the question then, why is it not being embraced so much more in a travel, meetings and events program when potentially anybody within an airline, within a hotel, within a corporate would be able to tap into their internal departments and actually learn from them, which is exactly what I had the fortune to do with many others in the team when I was at EY. So what I would say to yourself is think about, do you have conversations with the startups out there? Do you get to meet with them and understand and learn more about how it is that they're delivering some of their solutions? And also, are you speaking to your internal departments to learn from them as well? Just a couple of names I'll throw out there before we go on to the next slide. Blue Prism, UiPath. They're two companies that provide robotic process automation as well as various other things. I know we have access from a travel perspective to access many webinars, many podcasts, but have you ever thought about joining some of these other companies that provide tech, their webcasts or their podcasts? I actually went to a conference of UiPath couple of months ago, and it was fascinating to be in the room with many corporates probably represented on this call that were there, different departments and how they were actually using it. In that particular meeting, there was extensive insurance companies there, and they were all using RPA, whether it be to enhance the service to the claimants or whether it be to deliver more information in an automated way and in a quicker way. But I think, though, the key point here is, though, that within companies, it's being used now, and it's not something that's going to go away either. So if we go on to the next slide, please, Adam. That was so funny. I've just got a ping because I've not managed to turn off. So John, it's nice to know that you're on and you're listening as well. Sorry, I should have turned off my notifications on my laptop. Apologies for that. So here's just what I referenced earlier on, though, about the new tech that's out there and how actually you are using it all probably in your day-to-day life. So if you think about artificial intelligence and machine learning, you only need to go on to Facebook, TikTok, and any of those types of social media platforms to see how AI works constantly. The one time that you happen to look at the juggling elephant in India at some stage will mean that you then will constantly get pictures of a juggling elephant, or where you can buy videos of somebody doing that. But I think, all joking aside, that is AI and machine learning at its best and what we all experience every day. I think what's interesting now, though, is how that is developing. And I was recently working with a company around how it can analyze data. And we give it prompts to analyze the data, and then it comes back with whatever it is we've asked it to do. What's really interesting now, though, is it takes note of what it's been asked to do, but then it comes to you and says, well, actually, have you thought about this? Or have you thought about that? And this is where it takes these things to those next levels of ideas that you may not have thought about. And I think, you know, when I think about when we first started implementing robotic process automation in the travel program that I was very involved with, we had to guide it, we had to direct it, and then it would give us what we needed in a much quicker fashion. And also it enabled us to be having the system running constantly, but it never had the intellect to give us new ideas. And that's where it's gone to now. The next one here is blockchain. Blockchain is never an easy one to explain, and I still struggle to really understand in layman terms how best to explain it. But a really good example of blockchain is, for example, from the farm to table. So when something is actually harvested and how it actually gets into the supermarket. Blockchain is used regularly by many food companies around how they track how things are farmed, when it's transported, when it actually gets to the supermarket, when it actually gets to somebody's house. And the idea behind this is that you know exactly when it's been picked to when it's actually arrived at the supermarket. The other element of that, though, is if there is ever an issue where a recall is needed, then it knows exactly the chain that it's come from, the farm that it's come from, the countries it's been through, etc., to make the recall much easier. And I think the reality of it is that it is basically 100% safety proof, i.e., there is no tampering that can happen with that chain as it goes through. And so that's the key thing here that makes it much safer for when there is this type of food chain management, supply chain management, when it's gone through the blockchain, because then you know exactly how long it's taken. Next one on here is augmented reality. I could do with some of that at the moment. Zoom is never very kind. It's real. It really shows you every lump and bump that you may have. But as you'll know, on Snapchat or Instagram or TikTok, you have all of those different filters that you can look at. That's actually augmented reality. And I think the point that I'm making here is, if we talked about AI, machine learning, blockchain, AR, that creates an element of nervousness if you're not close to it. But if you just break it down underneath and actually realize that you are using it all the time, it takes away that fear factor perhaps that you may have, because you are actually using it. And so then it's around, how can I take some of those ways of working there and then adapt that to the travel program? And then the final one on here is just the Internet of Things, and that's about connected wearables. Whether you've got an Apple Watch that's connected to your phone, you've got a pet feeder, as people that know me with all of my various animals, is very useful. Unfortunately, it doesn't work quite so far to get to the horses, the goat, and the sheep. But I think you get what I mean here, though. It's around devices being connected together that can drive things to happen. Next slide, please, Adam. And then this slide may be familiar if there are any of my previous colleagues on the phone here, but I love this as an example of just the sheer volume of startups that there are in the travel meetings and events world. And quite honestly, this is an old slide. I think as soon as you put this slide up, it's old. But I think the reality is, though, is it gives you an idea of the volume of companies that are in the industry, have come through the industry, that may not be there any longer. But the reality is, though, is there are multiple different companies out there that are considered disruptors or startups, and they will all be using tech in a very different way than perhaps the traditional companies are using it at the moment. And so if you want to start to understand more about it, speak to any of these companies and they can then share with you how they use the different tech to drive the solutions that they have. Because I think the reality is why so many companies started up in the travel meetings and event space was the fact that they could see that it was ripe for change.
Mm-hmm.
What I would also say as well, though, is that we are in a very highly transactional environment. So the tens of thousands, the hundreds of thousands of air tickets that are issued, the hundreds of thousands, the 50 of thousands of room nights that are purchased, however you influence that can make a massive difference to whether it be the well-being of the employee, whether it be the compliance to the travel program, or whether it be delivering cost savings. The influence that you have over that volume of transactions is very difficult if you rely on it manually. However, if you can use tech to help, then that will certainly make a difference as it comes into the influence that you want to have. And if one of the company targets is to have employee engagement, employee retention, well, think about how can you make the lives of employees easier, linking the travel program to that, and what can you do to make the lives better for an employee who may be on the road a lot. All of these things are very difficult to do if you're doing it manually. But if you think about using some of the tech that we talked about earlier on to be able to drive some of those things, whether it be messaging, whether it be a way of talking to them in different ways through the digital wallet or WhatsApp or whatever it may be, you're enhancing the experience. On the other side, if you have a lot of non-compliance and you want to be able to stop that behavior, using dynamic messaging can actually drive some of that to change the behavior in advance of it actually happening. It's great to be able to say you shouldn't have done that, but the money's spent, the behavior's happened. What you want to try and do is do it in advance so that then you can reap the benefits of that change of behavior in the long run. The next slide then is just going to give you an idea of just an example, and this will certainly be very familiar as well to some people on the call, I expect, but this was the first robotic process automation that was implemented when I was at EY, actually. And I just think this is a very simple example of how you can change behavior, not in a manual way, but using technology to help. And so to break this down, basically, we had lots and lots of events that were happening, and we had lots and lots of people that would register their intent to attend the event. But what was happening was they weren't actually booking the flight. So we used to take downloads of everybody that had registered to attend the event, which was going into the C-Event site registration site. And then we would check to see whether somebody had booked their flight. If the answer was yes, they'd booked their flight, there was no action. If the answer was no, then a chaser email was sent to that individual to get them to book the flight. We saw millions of dollars of average ticket price reduction as a result of that, because what we were seeing was, whereas people, 90% were booking a week before the event was taking place, even though they had registered to attend the event 6 weeks before, we saw it switch around then to 95% were booking actually 4 months or more in advance. And we wouldn't have had the ability, the travel agency or the travel team at the time, to be able to manually do that because we had many events with thousands of attendees. But by using robotic process automation to do it on our behalf, we can actually leverage tech that was used for audit delivery as an example, but then use it and apply it within our travel program. And I would challenge everybody that you will have RPA in place in your organization, that you would be able to do something very similar to this. The great thing about any digital worker is invariably they don't need to go on holiday, they don't take sick. They run 24 hours a day, and they can actually take a massive volume of transactions as well that they can process. So it may be that your company has digital workers already that may have some capacity that you could actually feed a process into and be able to take advantage of this. I would also say as well that this is not lost either with any of the airlines, the hotels, or any of the other travel partners out there. There will be ways that you could use tech, whether it be robotic process automation or whatever it may be, to be able to use that to enhance experiences of your flyers or of your guests, as an example. And it really is just a case of thinking about the ideas out there and thinking about how great it would be if I could. And that's what I always like to think about. If I had the time and I could, then tech should be able to do that for you and not think about the fact that you can only do it by using people. People that may have heard me talk before will have heard me say, if you do something today, you're going to do it tomorrow, and you're going to do it the same way next week, then you shouldn't be doing it. You should be relying on tech to be able to do that for you. And that would be a simple RPA, robotic process automation process. But then you add into that some of the deep learning that can come with new ideas for you to think about. And that takes this then to a whole new level. What I would also say as well is that, when we talk about AI, it is not just around a chat bot. And you will notice that I've not really talked about chat bots at all as yet. Yes, there is a place for them. However, I do think, though, there are other things that can be done that will not impact somebody or potentially create negativity outside of a chatbot, because I still think that chatbots are only as good as the thousands of questions that have been preloaded, and that takes a lot to preload a lot of those questions. Of course, it will start to teach itself now because it's become much more intelligent, but it still has to start somewhere. And the one thing I would say, and as all of us are users of chatbots, when it doesn't answer your question, you get pretty fed up about it. And so I think perhaps sometimes it's better to think of other tech to use rather than chatbot, just so that you can actually have some successes without impacting potentially the end user. The next slide then just gives you a little bit more example around how you can actually have dynamic messaging, which again can change the behavior. And this links very nicely in with Clarasight and what Clarasight are all around, which is about how do you reduce the carbon emissions of a company. And this just gives examples here around how you can have dynamic messaging at the beginning before a trip happens to actually change that behavior. And so this is another example whereby information was being daily downloaded to take a look to see, well, who's booked on a day trip? Yes or no? Should they be taking the day trip? When during COVID, nobody needed to go on a day trip because nobody could travel anywhere. And then the other side of this is if they are traveling on a destination by air, that actually is a viable option by rail to challenge the individual to cancel the air trip and actually take the train instead. And this was just something that certainly supported the carbon emission reduction targets there. But this is just examples. You may have many different types of things that you need to challenge employees on. The idea of these examples that we've just given you here is to give you an idea of the art of the possible of what simple RPA can do for you in your program. So I can keep talking, Adam, you know me, and we've got 5 minutes left, I think. So I'll let you see if there's any questions.
So let me jump in. I think there was one question submitted earlier. You touched on an example. I'm happy to share some of what I've seen as well, but there was a question about what technology use cases have you seen drive the most progress for sustainability needs of the modern travel manager?
Yeah, I think for me, definitely is the behavior nudging.
Mm.
I think the key thing is you need to remind people that they should not be doing something. Now, you need to determine whatever that may be as a travel manager, and then you start nudging people to do the right thing. So those two last examples I showed you there, which was
Yeah.
to take the train instead of flying, or
Mm.
not to do day trips. There's all sorts of other things you could do, not to have so many people going on the same trip. But that would be my feedback on that. But Adam, I'm sure you'll be much more technical and eloquent on how you describe this.
Yeah, I speak to several travel leaders and or sustainability leaders at enterprises every single day, as does multiple members of our team. And I think one of the big pain points that we hear really frequently is this challenge around one, data unification. And so for leaders that are working with multiple, let's say TMCs or multiple expense management programs across multiple geographies, there is an enormous amount of very manual work that goes into unifying and creating a single source of truth that's accessible and able to derive both analytics as well as some of the forward-looking insights. And that's a fantastic problem for technology to solve, right? Especially some of the more modern technologies and some of the elements that Karen referenced earlier, where you can really leverage software in particular to unify and clean and consolidate data in very, very powerful ways that saves enormous amount of time. The second one that we see really frequently is, analytics can be built on top of a bunch of different platforms, but when it comes to forward-looking forecasting and scenario modeling, I spoke to somebody recently who said they're spending every single minute of their day trying to build scenario models to answer really important questions from leadership about where both emissions and spend are going to be within their program in the coming years, given the business drivers that they have knowledge around. And that, again, is something that software can really solve very efficiently and very effectively. So that's obviously part of our focus at Clarasight. So I have a lot of unique window of insight there, given what we deliver in our software and how we support companies. There's a couple questions that are coming in. Maybe we'll rapid fire because I know we only have a minute or two left. Colleen asks, how have companies shifted focus away from sustainability with the new administration? And do you suggest we strategize around these? I can take this one really briefly because I'm the one that's stateside, whereas Karen's on the other side of the pond. I think what we're seeing is certainly a pullback around some of the commitments to climate change within the US administration. For any large global company that has a presence in the EU, I think it remains to be seen, but we've yet to see a dramatic pullback. We're not seeing, eradication of things like CSRD. There might be simplification, but certainly if you're a US-only company, there might be, less of a priority there. But for any global company, it remains. Karen, there's a question from Lisa on modal shift and acknowledging that it's hard in the UK due to cost, but it's more sustainable. Any quick thoughts on modal shift and how you've seen that successfully implemented in any of the programs that you've led or supported?
I think the reality is that you should travel less. So in actual fact, if you're not spending so much on travel, the cost of perhaps going by train versus air is still counteracted by the fact that you've reduced your overall travel program expenditure. And I think we shouldn't be afraid to say that. I think there is a little bit, when we go to conferences, an elephant in the room to not talk about the fact that we shouldn't be traveling so much. But the reality is we shouldn't be traveling so much until we get SAF. And so that would be my answer to that. In theory, you should still be spending less.
Yeah. Jillian asked a question, thoughts on the security aspect of all of this data. I'll take that one quickly, which is, this is where it's really important to work with trusted partners, companies that meet ISO or GDPR or, some of the highest, most stringent elements of security and data privacy. And ideally, you're really bringing those colleagues into the conversation before you're sharing data with a third-party provider, because there are some folks that don't have those pieces in place. Having been through it at Clarasight, working with many very large enterprises, it requires a lot of dedication and commitment. And so I'd really do your diligence on the companies that you're partnering with. Last question here, really briefly from Karina. She asked, how would you challenge the change of behavior driven through policy when you allow bleisure, I guess kind of business leisure, as this can drive automatically where you fly more and add a business trip when things perhaps could have been done differently. Any thoughts there, Karen?
I mean, I think it's coming more and more around like the work from anywhere element, isn't there? And people are like mixing the two together.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think I think you just need to try and address it within your policy to make sure that you've got it covered, because it's not just from the sustainability perspective or
Yeah.
the fact that people are mixing it, but it's also from the insurance
Mm-hmm.
and where does it end and start from a company's perspective. But I don't think it's ever going to go away either. I think the reality is from an employee engagement retention, it may become even more apparent, and especially is there what 54 governments now allow people to work from
Mm-hmm.
different countries without having to get new visas. So yeah, I think there's more to be done in this space actually, and I think it's something that will become much more relevant as the year goes on, as well as more governments try to attract people.
Absolutely. Well, that's our time. I want to thank everybody that joined us today. It was a massive turnout, both in terms of registrants and those of you that are with us live. Again, we'll be circulating the recording shortly, and we hope that you've enjoyed this conversation with Karen Hutchings. We'll be shortly announcing our next expert masterclass with another phenomenal industry leader in the coming days. So feel free to keep the conversation going with us. And again, thank you for the time. Thank you so much, Karen, for joining us as well.
Thanks for having me.